In a world full of apps, docs and spreadsheets that still run absolutely everything, do you ever wonder if things could possibly change? Well, about a year ago, a company called Coda came out of stealth with the promise that anyone could make a document as powerful as an app. And now they're making good on that promise. And since the beta phase, tens of thousands of people across thousands of teams are using Coda every month. And we've got some big companies involved here too, such as Cheddar, Spotify and Uber, as well as small businesses such as the Hudson Baking Company, have all been building Coda docs to create solutions to their very real problems. And if you go by the Coda website whilst you're listening to this podcast, check out their gallery to see some of those Coda documents. So a couple of weeks ago, Coda and their new type of doc released Coda 1.0. And with it, there was a new mobile experience available on both mobile web and iOS. So the concept of a doc being as powerful as an app captured my attention. But when I also learned that the CEO has a rich tech history working at Google and Microsoft, I had to get him on the show to learn more. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to California so we could speak with Shira Mehrotra, CEO and co-founder of Coda. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Neil. I'm Shira Mehrotra. I run a startup called Coda that I've been working on for the past 4 or 5 years. Before that, I spent about 6 years at Google, most of that working on YouTube. I ran the tech side of YouTube. And before that, I spent about 6 years at Microsoft, worked on Office, Windows, and SQL Server. And before that, I started another startup called Centrata quite a while ago now.
Now, on this Daily Tech podcast, I love hearing about how tech is transforming every industry, but also, I think often more importantly, the story behind the solutions that are slowly changing the world. So can I ask that you share your journey that began with an observation that the world still runs on documents and spreadsheets for the last 40 years? Can you tell me a little bit about that and the inspiration behind what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So at Coda, we're building a new type of document. It blends the best of documents, spreadsheets, presentations, applications into one new surface. And we like to say that it allows anyone to make a doc as powerful as an app. And the idea for the company came out of two primary observations of the world. The first is that we think that docs, not apps, run the world. And so as we look around and look at our teammates or colleagues or what people do at home or at school, and you ask people what they use to keep themselves productive or to manage their systems or so on, they'll often name some packaged applications that they've bought or the things they've built, and they across all sorts of different examples. But if you actually observe them and you watch what they're doing, you'll see them in documents and spreadsheets all day long. And this is something, when I worked on the Office team, it was something we used to talk about as we saw in our user base. But when I got to Google, and particularly when I got to YouTube, this became very stark for me. This was right when Google Docs, Google Sheets was coming out, and we basically ran the entire company on Google Docs and Sheets. And things like the way we did goal planning, or the way we did performance management, or one of the fun stories was at when I joined YouTube back in 2008. If you hit flag on a YouTube video on the website, it would show up as a row in a spreadsheet on an ops person's desk. And that's how we manage things. So so there's a sort of first observation that even though there's all these applications out there, everything still seems to run in documents and spreadsheets. And then the second observation is, if you look at those documents and spreadsheets, they haven't really fundamentally changed in over 40 years. And we have this running joke at the company that if Austin Powers were to pop out of his freezing chamber, he wouldn't know what clothes to wear or what music to listen to, but he would absolutely know how to work a document, a spreadsheet, and a presentation. And it's a pretty simple reason. All the metaphors for those tools were set in the 1970s. As WordStar and Harvard Graphics and VisiCalc, gave us all the metaphors that we're still using today. How pages are laid out in a document, how slides are laid out in a presentation, a spreadsheet, everything like how you do A1, B2, C3 that we've all gotten used to. We like to call that battleship. All those metaphors have stayed exactly the same through 40 years. And you put these two observations together, and it's sort of interesting. This surface that where the use cases fundamentally changed, and we're now using this not just for digitizing paper documents and slide decks and so on, but we're actually using it to run our teams and our families and our businesses. We use it all day long. We stare at it, get all of our productivity done out of it, and yet we're using metaphors that are 40 years old. Every other piece of software in the world has changed in that time period. So what about documents? And so that's how we started. We said, what if we were to back up, ignore history, and start from scratch? What would we build then? And that's what we've been building, a new type of document.
I think it's fantastic, especially because of your background, being at YouTube and Microsoft and seeing firsthand that, you're right at the heart of the tech industry. But can you tell me more about how that moment that you realised that if you're going to build a new type of doc, you really were going to have to start right from scratch? I mean, it must have been quite daunting.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ideas that, I always like to say the sort of two questions I ask people when they come to me and say, should I start this company? And I always ask them, do you have an idea you can't imagine not working on? And do you have a person you can't imagine not working with? It's rarely the case that the answer to both those questions are yes. But when they are, it's sort of inevitable. You can see the gleam in an entrepreneur's eyes. They can't help but get started. And it almost becomes an obsession. So when we were getting started, myself, my co-founder Alex, and I, he was actually working on another startup at the time that thankfully wasn't going that well. And so I was helping him brainstorm other ideas. And one of us wrote the sentence on the board and said, what if you can make apps as easily as you can make docs? And once that showed up on the board, all of a sudden we had this whole list of ideas. It just kind of snapped into place. And we could just sort of picture the product. We could picture all the little elements of what we needed to get done. And it quickly became clear that none of those elements are things where you could just slightly twist one of the existing surfaces and have it just work. That you had to sort of fundamentally restart with a different type of information model. And everything from very fundamental concepts, like for example, we don't differentiate between document, spreadsheet, presentations all in one surface, down to like very specific details of the ways that the way our tables work, for example, is a lot closer to a database than to a spreadsheet. And we have an interaction model that people call buttons, or we call buttons, and people really like that people use to set up actions and workflows and so on. That are all these new types of building blocks reframed in a way that have to fit together perfectly. And at that point, we could picture the product. It was really clear that we weren't going to get there by iterating on a different product, and we just had to start the company.
So do you have any examples or maybe client stories that will help everybody listening visualize how this new type of doc will actually work inside their workplace?
Sure. I mean, we've maybe just in terms of framing for this, we launched the product about 3 months ago, and we did about a year-long beta before that. And so, we've amassed a pretty good community of users who give us great feedback. It's about tens of thousands of people now around the world. Thousands of companies are now using us. And that's all been pretty organic spread since we haven't really started doing any marketing for the product. So we've gotten this incredibly wide range of how people use the product, and some of the stories are amazing. We do a session every Thursday where we go through some of the stories that we hear in our community or in the chat forums and so on, and it's just really amazing. I would say there's sort of two big classes of examples. One is what I call the all-in-one thinkers, and the way they approach Coda is they think of it as a convergence of other tools. And so they, for example, one of the larger companies that uses us is there's a number of teams at Uber that use us. And the first team that picked us up there was responsible for reinventing their driver experience.